Okay, well, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you to IEL for organizing this expert forum this afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce the other speakers today, my colleagues, Professor Nuria Calvo Cortés from the Complutense University of Madrid and Professor Massimo Sturiale from the University of Milan. As you can see, our topic today is the study of late modern biographical discourse, and in the course of these presentations, we'll be addressing some issues and some new discoveries we've made while working on biographical discourse in our recent research. So we are going to look at ways in which biographical discourse can contribute to studies in historical linguistics, how important it is to track down sources underpinning the biographies because they may provide valuable information which maybe has always been hidden in plain sight. We are going to look at reliability of biographical discourse, and of course we're also going to pay attention to what features are included, what profiles, who is included and who is omitted, what life events are included and what life events are omitted, because biographies are not always the same and they may actually change over time. So our speakers today, Professor Nuria Calvo Cortés, Complutense University of Madrid. You probably know Professor Calvo Cortés's research on handwritten petition letters written in the 18th and 19th centuries in Britain by marginal groups of society, women and prisoners, for example, among them. She is now a member of the Inter-University Research Project on late modern English conceptualizations of female childhood, and she is now working on biographical and autobiographical discourse as witnessed in primary sources and in national dictionaries of biography. And this is the website of the project. I also participate in that project. You'll hear more about that later on. And if you go to this website, you will find both information about what we've done so far and the events in which we have participated and the next events. There's a hybrid one coming up soon to celebrate the anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, and you see the announcement in this slide. It's actually just around the corner on the 5th and 6th of May. And the names of the keynote speakers are also indicated there. Then Professor Massimo Sturiale, of course, needs no introduction to anyone working in late modern English studies and also in studies in prescriptivism. He now teaches at the University of Milan as associate professor, but previously he taught at the University of Catania in Ragusa Ibla, and he also obtained his master's degree from the University of Sheffield, in addition to having had numerous teaching and research roles elsewhere. You see two of his very important publications here: Perspectives on Prescriptivism, one of the earliest events to be organized on this topic, and a relatively recent article in the book edited by Professor Nicholas Brownlees, The Edinburgh History of the British and Irish Press, Volume 1, on the late 17th century, early 18th century, in which he discusses the presence of grammarians, lexicographers, orthopists in newspapers, in the press. And then, of course, myself, as you know, I work on late modern English, paying special attention to language history from below and the Scottish context. That was my earliest monograph on Scotticisms. And now there's a chapter coming out in the new Cambridge History of the English Language on networks and coalitions and language change. Massimo and I also participate in a PRIN National Research Project. This is a project sponsored by the Italian Ministry of University and Research. And this is an inter-university project which also includes units in Milan, Varese, and Florence. Bergamo deals with the language of well-being in the discourse of leisure and entertainment, whereas the other units look at the language of well-being from the point of view of news discourse, information, health, ego documents, letters, and all those ingredients that contribute to subjects' well-being. But Massimo and I have also contributed to a recent update of the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, coordinated by Susan Rennie. Thank you, Susan, for joining us this afternoon, in which entries on Scottish grammarians and lexicographers feature for the first time or are considerably updated. And in this page, in this slide, you see the names of the grammarians, lexicographers who were presented in this update of the ODNB. You probably know Susan Rennie's work for her studies on Jamison's dictionary, and of course for her rediscovery of James Boswell's lost manuscript of a Scots dictionary. And in the slide, you see two links to Susan Rennie's projects in this respect. We knew that James Boswell had drafted this Dictionary of Scots, never published it. At one point, this manuscript was lost, and then it was rediscovered in the Bodleian Library. And that's really something very important that occurred in recent years. What do we have in common? Well, the three of us share a long-standing interest in late modern English, of course, but we're also interested in pushing boundaries, exploring the works of lesser-known informants, going behind the scenes to shed new light on topics that may seem familiar, but which may in fact yield new findings. And of course, we are very interested in working together in the search for relevant novelty. At the same time, our presentations will highlight our own specificities and see how our individual researches are actually characterized by our own approach and interests. So at this point, the floor is given to the panelists, and I will come back later on for my own presentation and for the concluding remarks. So I'll unshare my screen at this point, and I'll give the floor to Professor Nuria Calvo Cortés from the Complutense University of Madrid. I learned the right sequence at one point. Sorry, apologies.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Thank you, Marina. Yeah, let's just be sharing this. Hopefully it'll be fine. Right. Presentation in the beginning. Okay, I think you can see it. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Marina, for this introduction. And yes, I'm just. Mine is like kind of another bit of introduction to the other two panelists, really. My information is a little bit more general regarding these dictionaries, regarding the work I've done, but I'm not going to explain a lot because of time reasons. We can talk about things later if you wish. So we all know what we're talking about when we talk about biographies, but I just selected these two notes to start the presentation. But in fact, my interest in biographies and biographical discourse go back to about 7-8 years ago when I started working with the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography as a source for this project you see on the slide, where we analyze normative age, looking at some kind of color structures. But more recently, in the last 4 years, I've been working in this other project that Marina has introduced and where Marina is also part of, and we have actually worked together. And we focus on female childhood. And in this case, we don't look just at the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, but more dictionaries of national biography, focusing on people born, more specifically, women, female biographies are the ones of our interest because we're interested in childhood within these biographies. But this is to give you an idea of the percentages of female versus male biographies in these 4 dictionaries. These figures are from May 2022, which is when we retrieved the data to begin with. And these are people born in that 150 years that we are looking at. So we can see women are underrepresented. And but apart from that, when we look at these dictionaries of national biography, we're interested in a lot of aspects. Yes, in this particular project, we're interested in the period of childhood, but looking at things in a more broad perspective, and this is something Marina and I have been doing as well, who's in these dictionaries? Who's not in these dictionaries? Why? What could be the reasons behind somebody not being included? What information do these biographies contain? And then other types of biographies, like Marina and I have been looking at other biographies not included, not part of this dictionary. So there's a lot we can look at. To say who's in these dictionaries, these 4 entries you can see here, or 4 bits, are from these 4 dictionaries. So they're word by word what you can read there. And I have highlighted some of the words that refer to who is in this dictionary. So obviously we expect people who have some kind of significance for that particular culture, that particular country, and so on. When we look at the biographies themselves, we find information that is expected, facts and dates, and we would think, well, things like birth, date of birth, date of death, this is going to appear always there. Well, yes and no. If we looked at all of them, sometimes we might find that there's not a clear or not a known exact date for a birth of somebody. And when we look at the length of the biographies, some are obviously longer than others. And this, I'm talking about the dictionaries now. Some of them contain photographs or pictures of the people that the biography is about. Some of them contain links to other biographies. In this case, they are often, because we're looking at women, they're often links to men that are relevant in the lives of these people, brothers, the father, the husband. Very interesting, they contain, some of them contain direct speech from the biographies. And this is very useful information because this is first-hand information. And in this case, there is no bias. And so it can provide a different perspective. And certainly the childhood years are neglected. Why they are neglected, we're not sure. Is it because the information is not there? Is it because the information is not necessary? A lot of questions could be asked and answered here. This is an example of one biography that we can find in the Australian Dictionary of Biography. This dictionary is free access, and we retrieved all these women born between 175 and 1900. And this is not a full biography. This is just the beginning of it. And we have a picture of this woman. I just picked this randomly, but we can see 2 things that I wanted to indicate. What's in green is telling us that there is some doubt about this woman in particular. Was it the woman? The biographer is not sure. Is this a different person? Is the location where she was born? Or I mean, there is some records that can be confusing. We can go back to that later if you like. And I have highlighted there that expression, her early life, just to indicate that this could refer to her childhood, but very often we have trouble because we don't find a particular year, age. So we have to guess how old is this early life? I mean, what period of life are we talking about? Now, this woman was first appeared in a biography much earlier, written by somebody who was related to the family where she worked as a servant in England. And I'm not going to read all this, but at the very end, you can see that there is doubt that the information that this man recorded was actually real. And there seem to be inconsistencies between the material that he allegedly used as a source, which is the letters that she wrote herself, and what he actually recorded. Here you have one of these letters. It's not very clear, but that's not the point. That's just to give us an idea that we have these first-hand materials that can be very useful. We also have other material that may not have been written by these people, but be about these people, like this advert, for example. And this contains information that might be useful for the biographer, because we have there information regarding her physical appearance, for instance. Now, going back to who's missing in these dictionaries, we have here Marina and I have been working in the biography of a girl called, the one you have there, Draper, in the green box. She was a musician. I'm not going to go into details because we don't have time, but we could go back to that. This is an advert about a concert in London, and the people in blue are musicians that are present in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. The people in green are musicians that are not present. Why? Well, we still need to learn a lot about it, but if we look at this database of calendar of London concerts of the time, we find the same concept reflected here. And if we look into detail at these 6 people that are in the advert, the first 3 that we can see here, these are all concerts in that period of time. So we can see that Stanley and Reinhold, 2 men, they actually appeared in a lot of concerts. So it's not surprising they're there. But the next one is a woman, Sarah Harrop. She, compared to the other 3 that we have here at the bottom, that are the ones that are not present in the dictionary, and we precisely compared to Draper here, we see that she actually appeared in less concerts. However, Draper is not in the dictionary. Neither are these other 2 characters, but again, this obviously didn't appear in many, and there's doubt about this person, who he was in fact. And this one was probably foreign, so there isn't, maybe it wasn't a person that would be in that national dictionary because of not being a Brit or not related to that society as such. And just to finish off and pass the floor to Marina back again and Massimo. They obviously have first-hand experience because they have written entries for the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. So they're going to tell us more about it and where they find information. We have things like newspapers, personal letters, archives, collections, etc. So I will we'll go back to them, and then any questions or things we can go into detail later. Thank you.
Many thanks to you.
Sharing. Yeah, that's it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That was an excellent start to this workshop, because it gives you an idea of just how much there is to investigate when it comes to biographies. As for my own experience in that respect, I'll see if I can now share my own presentation. Let's see where the paper is, and that should be it. Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Okay, so my entry was on James Buchanan, grammarian, teacher, orthopist. He is credited with having published the first pronunciation dictionary of the English language in late modern times. And secondary sources had always indicated James Buchanan as active between 1753 and 1773. But if you look at the title page of his 1773 publication, you see that this is actually published for the benefit of Mr. Buchanan's widow. So that means that by then, Mr. Buchanan was already dead. And there's something to find out about that. I think I worked out what happened. But just to go back to James Buchanan's profile, he was presumably born and bred in Scotland, where he also died. He published all his works in London. The books he published himself were all published in London between 1753 and 1770. And if you look at this list, you find that there are some familiar names among London publishers of the mid-18th century. There's Andrew Miller in the Strand, there's Edward and Charles Dilly in the Poultry, and you can get an idea of the kind of network, the kind of environment in which James Buchanan was actually active. But he was also a teacher. In his new pocketbook for young gentlemen and ladies, published in 1757, he presents himself as master of the boarding school at Loughborough House, opposite Stockwell in Surrey. So we are in the Lambeth area, and you can actually see this later watercolor that gives you an idea of what the school may have looked like in those days. He also advertised his school in the Public Advertiser, and you see that in this advertisement published in the Public Advertiser in January 1758, he outlines the kind of audience he addresses, the kind of students, both English students and international students, and the kind of teaching approach that his method, his plan aims to present. Also providing genteel accommodations for foreign gentlemen. So it was a boarding school as well. He was also available for private classes. He offered private tuition. You see another announcement, this time in the Public Advertiser of the 2nd of May, 1765. He presents himself as author of the British Grammar and proposes to teach both young boys and young ladies, persons and youth of both sexes, to speak and write the English language grammatically and to indite with that magic word of late modern times, propriety. He also adds a little bit about his method in order to elicit interest. And again, you find the availability to teach international students as well. Where can you get information if you want to get these private classes from Mr. Buchanan? Well, you can inquire at his publishers, Mr. Miller's bookseller in the Strand, Mr. Dilly's bookseller in the Poultry, or Mr. Loud's in Bridge Street, near George Street in Westminster. So you see that the network of publishers, printers, booksellers also functioned as a network for the circulation of information for potential learners and for teachers, of course, as well. But every now and again, he was also back in Scotland. We have this advertisement published in the Caledonian Mercury in November 1765, in which we have the advertisement for an essay towards an establishing a standard for an English, a uniform pronunciation of the English language. And nota bene, Mr. Buchanan is now in Edinburgh and has brought with him a number of his books from London. Where can these books be found? Well, you can obtain them from his lodging in Borthwick's Close, Balfour's Coffee House. So we actually have a map of where James Buchanan was active. We have his address in Edinburgh. So you see that it's just so much more than having just 2 days. Well, he was active between 1753 and 1773. You can find out a lot more about the kind of environment in which these grammarians, lexicographers, orthopists actually moved. You can still see Borthwick's Close. It's very close to the castle and St. Giles Cathedral. You can actually go there and walk in James Buchanan's footsteps. We have this print of John Balfour's Coffee House. We don't know who these gentlemen were. It's, of course, from a different year, but you get an idea of what the place was like. And of course, the old assembly close looks very different today, but it's also something you can still see. Something very important when we look at his works is the kind of network that he had in terms of dedicatees. All his dedicatees were illustrious people of the Hanoverian society of the time, of course. Buchanan's Grammar of 1762 was dedicated to Queen Charlotte. Both editions of his Syntax were dedicated to George, Prince of Wales, that is the future George IV, and the Complete Scholar to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and his essay on pronunciation to the Houses of Parliament. So this tells you what kind of patronage he was seeking, what kind of society he was trying to join, or at least what kind of interlocutors he might actually have at some point. One of his dedicatees is actually Francis Stuart, 9th Earl of Moray, who also had properties in Edinburgh. So that's probably something that suggests that by then he either was back in Scotland or wanted to move back to Scotland. At that point, we find this interesting dedication to Scottish nobility. So again, probably a change of scene is in the cards. And as I was saying at the beginning, his last publication is actually the first 6 books of Milton's Paradise Lost, and the title page is very interesting because it says it's by the late James Buchanan, author of the British Grammar, regular English syntax, etc. And the manuscript was left with Dr. James Robertson, professor of Hebrew. He was also librarian at the University of Edinburgh, so he obviously shared an interest with Buchanan. And it was published for the benefit of Mr. Buchanan's widow in 1773. But it gets even better than that, because then we see the widow's dedication to her late husband's pupil. Elizabeth Buchanan dedicated the publication to Elizabeth, Countess of Sutherland, later Duchess of Sutherland. She would go on to become a rather notorious figure in the Highland clearances. But at this stage, she is a young woman, a child in actual fact, well, young woman, very young child, not terribly young, but still. And Elizabeth Buchanan praises the success with which the Countess had learned to read when only between 5 and 6. Under the guidance of her late husband, who had flattered himself with the prospect of likewise instructing her in the principles of English grammar, if he had not passed away. So we have a clue about when James Buchanan may have died, because we know that Elizabeth, Countess of Sutherland, was born in Leven Lodge, on the outskirts of Edinburgh, on the 24th of May, 1765. So if she was James Buchanan's pupil up to the age of 5 or 6, we may assume that James Buchanan died sometime between 1770 and 1771, perhaps. So I looked at entries in archives, graveyard entries, and I found 2 James Buchanan, one in Greyfriars Kirkyard and one in Canongate Kirkyard. For the James Buchanan in Greyfriars Kirkyard, there's just the name and the date, but for the James Buchanan in Canongate Kirkyard, we have a date and something even more interesting. It says James Buchanan, teacher. And this entry also tells us where he's buried, how old he was when he died and his cause of death. He died of gout, which could be lethal in the late 18th century, as we know. So why would they want to add his profession? This is not something we find in other entries. It probably means that he was a relatively important teacher. He moved in relatively high society. We cannot be sure, of course, that it's actually him, but looking at dates and looking at details, this is probably the date we were looking for, I was looking for anyway. He was buried south from the coachman's burial place. His grave is still unmarked, if it ever was. Hopefully it won't be unmarked for long now, but that's something that we'll have to wait and see what happens. You can still see the coachman's burial place. This is the headstone that the Society of Coach Drivers had set up in Canongate Kirkyard. So if James Buchanan is south of this, he's somewhere between this and Adam Smith, roughly speaking, if you know Canongate Kirkyard. So it's a biography for which I'm indebted to a widow and, of course, to a young girl. As Nuria was saying, the biographies of young girls can also be very interesting. We don't know what may crop up. So, well, I look forward to talking about this a little more if you have questions or comments, but I guess that's all from me for now. So I can now give the floor to Massimo for his own entry in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography in relation to William Perry, another household name in late modern studies. So, Massimo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marina. And try and share my slides. Can you see my slide? Am I showing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And okay, thank you very much. And for my talk today, as Marina and Nuria already know, I came up with what I hoped would be a catchy title. Indeed, when writing biographies, gaps in a person's life are not just expected, they are often the norm. And that's certainly the case with William Perry. So, as you can see, both his date of birth and the date of death are uncertain, nor is his place of birth clearly known. What we do know is that he ran his own school or academy in Kelso, which he opened in 1771. Kelso may well have been his birthplace. He was married probably to Elizabeth Notman and had a daughter, Mary, who was born in Kelso in 1774. In 1775, he moved to Edinburgh. There, after starting his own printing company, he was imprisoned for debt in 1778. He later moved to London and returned to Edinburgh between 1795 and 1805. Indeed, he led quite an adventurous life and took on several professions, being a teacher, a therapist, lexicographer, and even a surgeon. I began studying Perry in 2003, and in 2006, I published my first article on his pronouncing dictionary, where I wrote that unlike other 18th century lexicographers, little is known about William Perry, and such information as we have is not fully detailed, and in some instances, they lack precision. The only attempt to reconstruct Perry's life is represented by Alexander Low's study, published almost 50 years ago, 1958. And what also I stated in 2006, for example, there's neither an entry in the Dictionary National Biography nor any biographical entry in the Eminent Scotsman. So something that I noticed at the time is that in 2004, both Sheldons and Walker had their entries in the Oxford Dictionary National Biography. So what I can claim is that with the publication of my own entry in the Oxford Dictionary National Biography, probably a few of these gaps have finally been filled. Perry was indeed a prolific author. Four out of his 8 publications were dictionaries.
Sorry, something seems to have...
published
okay.
authors, as is often the case. Is it okay?
It is now. It is now. We couldn't hear you. You were frozen just for a few seconds in the previous one.
Okay. Or shall I go back? Or do you think
if
it's
you
fine?
want to, yeah, if you want to.
So what I was saying is that indeed Perry was a prolific author, and 4 out of his 8 publications were dictionaries, and this output reflects both his scholarly ambitions but also his practical approach to language education. So, as is often the case, that's what I was saying, as is often the case with published authors, biographical details can be found within their own texts, but these are not always reliable. As, for example, if we compare the title pages of Perry's first edition of his dictionary published in 1775 in Britain, and the publication and the title page of the first American edition of the same dictionary, what we can notice is that in the American version, Perry was indicated as a lecturer at the Academy at Edinburgh. And indeed, what we know is that he was a schoolmaster at his own private school. And the same wrong information had also been reproduced in the American edition of the Onshore Guides to the English Tongue, which was his spelling book. So, texts, paratext, and as Marina has just shown, newspapers are important sources for biographers. And for example, what we can find by reading the title page of his synonymous dictionary is that by 1805, he was already a surgeon to the Royal Navy. So, and newspapers, and in Perry's case, advertisements, again, as shown by Marina for Buchanan as well, have proved to be reliable and revealing sources. They have helped me trace Perry's move from Kelso to Edinburgh, offering useful dates along the way. For instance, an advertisement published in the Edinburgh Advertiser at the start of 1775, precisely on the 27th of January 1775, tell us that he was already looking for a house to rent in Edinburgh. So he had already planned to leave Kelso, and he was looking for a house. Then later that year, in May, to be precise, the Newcastle Weekly Chronicle reveals even more. It tells us that Perry, like Sheridan, was giving lectures on elocution in Northern England, that he had already moved to Edinburgh, had planned to open his own school in June, and was also working on his pronouncing dictionary. What is interesting is that I came across this ad only recently, and only after I had published my entry for the Oxford Dictionary National Biography, because it was recently added to the newspapers.com archive. This highlights an important point. While digitized newspapers are invaluable to the biographer, they require ongoing attention as new material continues to be uploaded and catalogued. Again, for example, the Edinburgh Advertiser on the 13th of June 1775 informs us that Perry had already opened his school in Edinburgh, and precisely in Taylor's Hall, and that he had already started, he had already planned to publish a dictionary, which he later published at the end of 1775. So what could be some concluding thoughts is that William Perry's life and the effort to piece it together reminds us that gaps in biography aren't just obstacles. Indeed, they are invitations for the biographer. They ask us to look more closely, to read between the lines, and sometimes to get a little creative. In Perry's case, paratexts and advertisements, often overlooked materials, have proved to be central to reconstructing a life that until recently had slipped through the cracks of history. And while digitized archives like newspapers.com are transforming our access to sources, they also remind us that biography is never truly complete. It's provisional. So we go on tracking, discovering, and sometimes rediscovering. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Massimo. Thanks. Yes, I like the idea of the biography as a moving target, because that's exactly what happens. You've got to keep looking at different sources and think outside the box, literally. So I'm now going to go back to the previous section so I can go back to concluding remarks. And Massimo, you probably need to unshare.
Yes, that the thing is, I
screen.
don't know what happens, but I can't stop sharing. Okay.
Okay.
Right, I did. I know. Sorry about that.
I'll I think that's where we are. I think that's where we are. Is that where we are?
Yes.
Concluding overview. Okay.
Yeah.
So just to summarize, basically, some of the key points we have highlighted in these presentations. I think we could actually say that we've highlighted the importance of a special focus on the sources that underpin the biographies, because they may provide unexpected revealing details and, as Massimo was saying just now, repositories, digital repositories are constantly updated. And even traditional repositories may be updated because, as we were saying before, documents may be rediscovered that were supposed to be lost, and then we find that they were simply misplaced among other people's papers. So keep an eye on repositories, no matter whether they're digital or actual paper repositories, because there may be new findings all the time, and findings may be enhanced at a later stage. The other important thing is that we need to go beyond what I call the good, the bad, and the infamous, or the famous, if you prefer, because there are other stories that can be equally significant from the point of view of cultural history, of linguistic history, not least in relation to networks. And we know that social network theory has become increasingly important in historical linguistic studies. We do not just look at the text per se, we also look at the text in their social context. So this is where biographies can help us identify what was going on. Moreover, we've always got to focus on the crucial significance of analyzing what is said and how, because contents may be selective. We may find the kind of evaluative language that elicits empathy, admiration, judgment, indirect persuasion, perhaps. So biographies, and indeed autobiographies as well, might be seen as a special kind of argumentative discourse, where the argumentation doesn't concern a topic, an issue, but the way in which a certain person is perceived and somehow remembered through time. So there is a lot to think about for us in future as well. I'm sure we'll all continue our investigation of biographies. Many thanks again to Susan for organizing the December update of the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. At first it seemed a challenge because it looked as if there was nothing on poor James Buchanan. He was always stigmatized as the arch prescriptivist and also a bit of a unionist and also Hanoverian and whatnot. But at the end of the day, perhaps he was just a teacher and trying to, do his work as well as he could in the right circles, and many other aspects might actually be added. More information could be added in relation to the cultural scene of London, for example. Nuria has written a lot about the Foundling Hospital. And of course, that's also another very important area where important people somehow gathered and contributed. But you also have other subjects worth investigating. And of course, Massimo and the different editions of Perry's works highlight how important it is to look at different editions and different views of even the same text. So I guess that's basically all we wanted to share today. And I think we can now save a little time for Q&A, debate. And if you want to get in touch with us, we look forward to hearing from you. And well, that's all. If you have comments or questions, here we are.